so you're hitting this. I know you've got some other events in the area. Is this like your big gay day on the campaign trail?
Even though I'm a former Republican, I was kind of the libertarian, marriage equality former Republican. And so I've been fortunate since the year we got into this race to really build community and affinity and support with the LGBTQ plus community from day one. No, it's not the first time in our campaign. We've immersed ourselves within the community and the issues. But certainly when you visit the Stonewall Museum, you step into a perspective that orients you and orients this campaign in a way that I always want to remain true to and mindful to. I mean, one of the values of this campaign is celebrating the dignity of everyone, right? I talk about protecting everyone's rights, but celebrating their dignity. Celebrating their dignity, we sometimes skip past when we talk about protecting rights. And I think much of the narrative that we just left is about the history of either failing to or stepping up to celebrate the dignity of everyone. And so, I enjoy days like this on the campaign. I regret my wife's not here because she would enjoy this as much as well.
Steve?
Hi, Steve Rothaus, and I covered LGBTQ issues for the Miami Herald for 22 years.
Yeah.
And along the way, I covered Ileana Rose Layton and basically her evolution, as she put it, on LGBT issues. And I know that you underwent a similar type of evolution as a younger Republican, and then as you moved forward in Congress and you suddenly, began to change your perspectives on certain things like marriage. Mm-hmm. Tell us, how did that happen? Because there are other people that were still waiting for them to...
Yeah, oh boy, I could tell you a lot of stories. When I was in Congress, it was basically Ileana, myself, and Fred Upton who supported marriage equality on our side of the aisle. This was before many of the landmark cases. This was before President Obama supported marriage equality publicly, at least. And I would also say marriage equality was an issue I was an early supporter of. There were other issues. So let's back up a little bit. I'm a preacher's kid in a Southern Baptist home. Mm-hmm. My father was, you can imagine, a Southern Baptist preacher's kid in Georgia and rural Florida in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a very conservative environment. Fortunately, a father and a mother who, whether they would admit it or not, practiced progressive evangelism. My father was run out of a church in West Georgia in the 60s for baptizing a young woman of color when the deacon said, if you do this, you're no longer the pastor of the church. So despite being in a denomination where conservative viewpoints on love and marriage and life were overwhelmingly predominant, I mean, there was not room for anything else. Somewhere I grew up seeing my parents always lead with love. And then as a young emerging lawyer, I really was drawn to the fundamental teachings of liberty and freedom and less government, and I wasn't threatened as a young Republican by a constitutional perspective that recognized everybody's fundamental rights, whether it was marriage or healthcare or whatever it might be. But certainly along the way, reproductive freedom is an area where I can remember the inflection points more precisely. But on equality, I'm sure in the archives you could find some votes or legislation that you could contest me with, and that's fine. I could certainly talk through them. But it was one where I was always there early, I think, when it came to Republican politics. And there was a moment where, in my first congressional run, I acknowledged my support for marriage equality. And it was related to the ballot initiative in Florida, maybe in 2010 or 2012. There was this interesting moment.
2008?
Maybe it was 08.
Right, that was the constitutional amendment.
Yeah, and there was this interesting moment in the debate where we were talking in double negatives. and I was expressing my support for marriage equality, and the people in the room got it because some of my Republican friends said, wow, I didn't realize you were going to go there. And I probably at the time definitely used language talking about my religious teachings being in conflict with this constitutional principle. I would often do that in those days. But I remember calling my mom and saying, hey, I think the story tomorrow is going to be that I support marriage equality, and you need to be ready for this. Preacher and preacher's wife, you need to be ready. And it never was a story in the campaign. It never was. And so then I get to Congress, and shortly thereafter the Key West decision comes down. And I'm asked by some in the advocacy community, hey, new Republican member, will you support, or will you express public support for the Key West decision? And I said, sure. And I remember a senior member of our team saying, you don't want to do this, it's going to make news. And I said, no, it's not. This isn't an issue anymore. We're past this. Well, I expressed support, and it was front page of the Washington Post the next day. and I realized what we had stepped into. And there was a letter from faith leaders in Pinellas County in my district publicly in the Tampa Bay Times denouncing me, telling me that if I didn't retract my position, they were going to get me out of office, that I had broken a promise to them. And I started on a kind of a message and a bit of a personal campaign to the faith community from which I had been raised, where I would say to them, when you have a teaching of your faith, it should be a flag to you, a big red flag, that it shouldn't enter the constitutional construct. That a faith teaching is there for us to protect your religious liberties, to evangelize, but a faith teaching is not there to be indoctrinated into statute and into law. And that later began to inform my view of reproductive freedom and some other issues as I began to wrestle with the dissonance between my personal faith teachings and my view of constitutional protections and liberties. So, I say I was an early advocate of marriage equality, early in terms of Republican politics, right? Certainly not early in terms of the community or the religious community in which I had been raised.
So now take that forward, and here you are running as a Democrat.
Yeah.
So when people say, well, can he be trusted? Do you ever refer to these particular stands that you took along the way while you were a Republican, that perhaps your positions then as a Republican congressman might be more in line with how people in the Democratic Party feel today?
Yeah, so if it's a question of trust, obviously that unlocks a broader conversation in politics. And part of this campaign has been having a conversation about trust for the last year. What I would suggest is that to be a Republican member of Congress, supporting marriage equality before the Democratic president was, to vote, to be the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. After the Pulse nightclub, when Democrats were having a sit-in, to be the only Republican that went to the floor and crafted with them a compromise around no fly, no buy to try to prevent the next shooting like we saw at Pulse, to support climate science and campaign finance reform. It certainly didn't make me a popular Republican, but in a two-party system, the Democratic Party didn't, I got some attaboys, but they didn't want me or need me. I mean, my story in politics is the axiom, if you stand in the middle of the road, you get run over. And that was a little bit of how my congressional career ended. I got run over because Democrats had their team and they didn't need me on it. And Republicans didn't want me on theirs. And I spent 5 or 6 years as an independent. But I say it has led me to a place where I am a proud Florida Democrat today, not a reluctant one. And I also tell the story very respectfully and constructively. Listen, when I left the Republican Party, I didn't feel welcome in the Democratic Party. That 18 cycle, the Democratic Party was not welcoming to former Republicans looking for a home. And for some reasons, all parties go through these family conversations. And in 18, the Democratic family conversation was, are we going left? Are we going right? Is this AOC in the squad? Is it Joe Biden? And there wasn't room at the table for former Republicans. I continued my journey of change, right? I don't say what respectfully Charlie Crist used to say when he say I didn't leave the party left me. No, I left the party. I've grown, I've changed. So I've continued to grow in my ideology. But I think the Democratic Party in the last 2 years has become much more embracing of people from all walks of life. I still speak openly about my faith on the campaign trail. Now, I say it not to evangelize. I say it because I think it's time the state has a governor who can speak about their faith and recognize that their faith stops at the steps to the State House. I think what's gotten us in trouble in the last 10 years is a governor who doesn't recognize where that firewall should be. But even so, using that language about the limitations of faith in the public square, that conversation I did not feel was a welcome one in the Democratic Party 4 years ago, but it is now. and it's kind of celebrated now. And I credit Vice President Harris at her convention for welcoming in people who may have been former Republicans, maybe people of faith, people who believed in strong national defense, but she created a big enough table for everybody, and it's when I knew it was time to become a Democrat.
So we all know 8 years ago, DeSantis won his first election by like a wasp's breath, like just a few thousand votes, right? But then 4 years later, it exploded to like 19 points. You said when we were over on the other side of the building that this campaign is doing things differently. What are you doing differently, and where are you looking to pick up a ton of votes, like throughout the county, not just in the gay community? I'm talking about a Democrat winning a statewide election. I mean, I think Kentucky has done that twice since we have done it once.
Yeah.
So where are we? How do you get those votes and get into the office?
Yeah. So I've been out of politics for 10 years. I've been out long enough to tell the truth. I'm in a very post-ideological space. I don't worry about the left-right spectrum. I don't worry about the dogma that I think really unnaturally handcuffs us to trying to solve some of the major problems we have. We have to accept the numbers in the state. We are a Democratic Party with 1.5 million fewer registrations than Republicans. But what is different in 26 from 22 is that voters are demanding change in a way that favors Democratic candidates. In 22, we can argue with it, but voters were telling us that they wanted a state that didn't recognize COVID, that they wanted a state that didn't shut down, that the culture wars were okay. Whatever was happening in the body politic, voters tell us each cycle what they want. You know, sometimes as analysts and politicians, we try to think, oh, I'm smarter than the voters are, and if I just do it this way, we'll get all the voters. No, voters tell us what they want. Sometimes we disagree with it. That's how we have elections, right? I disagree with the direction the state chose overwhelmingly in 22, but they did. Val lost by 16, Charlie lost by 18, our CFO candidate, I think, by 20, because voters were embracing the free state of Florida. The culture wars that were dividing us overwhelmingly were being supported. The post-COVID economy. What is different now in 26 is you have Democratic performing voters who are standing up saying, I'm going to turn out now in a way I never have before. Voter turnout among Democrats is hitting records. But you also have independents that just 18 months ago were performing 2-1 for Republicans are now performing 3-1 for Democrats. And I think we're going to get 18% of Republicans in this race. Now, what are some other reasons? We are a state that is gripped by an economic crisis and exhausted by culture wars. Republicans have had control for 30 years. Republicans and independents are suffering from the economic crisis and the culture wars just as much as Democrats are, right? Even your soft Republicans, they know their kids and grandkids don't want to live here because they don't feel welcome, or their snowbird friends don't want to come. They know that their homeowner's insurance is out of reach, or that they can't afford their rents and they're having to pull their kids out of school. Those are Republicans, independents, and Democrats. And so what we are seeing is not that we are registering more Democrats, but that more voters are already voting for Democrats in Florida. In Florida. I hope my Republican colleagues rest on two things. There's a voter registration delta that favors them, and 22 was a wipeout. I hope that's what Republicans think will define the 26 race, but 26 ain't 2022. What's happening in our 2 congressional specials, voters have outperformed for Democrats by 15 and 16 points, and that was a year ago before the wave started building. State legislative races by 15, 20, 25 points. Eileen Higgins wins in Miami, and it's not even close, 19 points. We're gaining ground in the villages, And so, yes, if this race were held today for governor, I'm afraid we'd win it. Because Democrats right now are outperforming Democratic candidates, not because we're registering more Democrats, but because more voters, unlike we've seen in decades in Florida, are willing to give Democrats the opportunity to lead. Now, I do think that is incumbent, there's a responsibility incumbent on us now as Democrats, how we build that coalition, right? If we know what voters are asking, but if we as Democrats try to litigate the 2018 cycle or the 20 cycle or the 22, we're going to lose. What we need to do is litigate the 26 cycle because voters are telling us what they need. So, I talk about 3 values and principles of this campaign. The economy should work for everyone, government can improve our lives, and everybody's rights should be protected and their dignity celebrated. Those are the broad values. Policies flow from that, but those values are rooted in democratic tradition. The economy should work for everyone. Government can be used to help people. And everybody's rights should be protected and their dignity celebrated. So for our party, from the young progressives to the last blue dog standing, those are our values. But for the disaffected independent and Republican right now, begging for change because the economy's not working and their kids don't want to live here because of culture wars, those values allow us to solve those problems for those voters.
Culture wars can be nationalized in almost any state. The economy can be nationalized in almost any state. But one place that Florida really literally sticks out, as in sticks out into the Caribbean, is our homeowners insurance. Nobody wants to insure us. Like I don't have a mansion. I've got a nice 1,100 square foot house, right? I would have to pay $15,000 in premiums and deductibles before I would ever get a dime back from a lot of the general offerings. Everybody comes along every 4 years and says, I've got a plan, we're going to do something has to be done. And Republicans and Democrats do it, but nobody ever lays something out.
I've laid it out.
I agree with you. Tell me your position paper.
I agree with you. I don't think anybody's had a bold solution to this because they've been afraid to talk about what's really happening in insurance. But let me give you a top line. I appreciate you asking this because too many times in politics, as candidates, as parties, and as consultants and analysts and armchair quarterbacks from all parties, we think about a single community and we think their issues are only informed by a single issue. Right, we think of the immigrant community and think their only issue must be immigration. The LGBTQ plus community must only care about equality. The fact is, the number one issue for voters across this state is the economy right now. The ability to afford groceries, to afford health care, or to afford a home, or to afford your rent. So on insurance specifically for homeowners, and I would also tell you, so the affordability crisis presents itself in 3 areas right now: housing, healthcare, and now education. Education is now part of the economic crisis because in a universal choice state where schools get to charge tuition on top of vouchers and we've defunded public education, education is now part of the economic crisis. When it comes to housing, we often look at homeowners first, but the reality is the hardest hit groups are the renters right now. And we've got to have plans for that as well. Homeowners insurance though, and I won't put you to sleep, but when I was in Congress, I authored a national catastrophic fund. I believe the state of Florida needs a state catastrophic fund to fully remove hurricane and natural disaster coverage from the private market altogether and put it in a state sovereign wealth fund. It will cut homeowners insurance by 60 to 70% for absolutely everybody. We can include commercial properties and rental properties in it. It does a couple of things. It acknowledges that we have ignored climate science for too long and there is not an affordable way to cover natural disasters. There is a market-based way to do it. It's just too expensive for homeowners and property owners. I wish there was a private sector solution to cover natural disasters. I don't think there is anymore. I think that market has collapsed. So I think public policy requires a state catastrophic fund. What does that look like? My Republican friends call it socialism. It's called cheaper insurance. But they already fund socialism. Republicans fund a state hurricane fund right now, and they use it to bail out insurance companies. So let's accept the platform that they've been funding now up to $8 billion. They put $8 billion in this, and they use it to promise undercapitalized insurance companies in Florida that will bail you out if the big storm hits. We also say to our insurance companies, we're not going to tax your profits. You can send your profits out of state. We'll just let you declare your losses here. The private sector market is collapsing under Republican insurance plans. So let's take the state hurricane fund, populate the revenue over probably 4 years. We would have to populate the revenue before we could provide coverage. But in 3 to 4 years, if we can drive that north of about $32 billion, you can fully assume hurricane coverage from the private market. That sovereign wealth fund buys reinsurance from Lloyd's on the world stage. It buys up income producing properties in the other 49 states, toll roads and hard real estate. Actuarially, this is not David Jolly's idea. This is a model that has been sitting on the shelf waiting for a politician bold enough to say this is where we need to go and shatter the left-right paradigm and say this is no longer a conversation about socialism or capitalism. This is recognizing that too many Floridians can't afford to insure their homes, and so we're going to move it into a state sovereign wealth fund. I'm sorry I answered questions so long, but I'm a policy wonk, particularly on that.
Believe me, I appreciate that. Where do you stand on any support to no support for the proposed property tax reform bill is moving through Tallahassee this season.
Yeah, I was a Republican, and I joke, but it's true. Republican math never works. John Boehner used to tell me, "Don't worry, the math will work out. It'll be 30 or 40 years, it'll all work out," and it never does, and it never has, and it won't. We know that repealing property taxes does one of two things: it defunds critical services, or it pushes the tax burden on our rental community, or into a sales tax, or into some other revenue environment. The Republican math has never shown us what their plan is. Is their plan to fully defund services and make local communities wards of the state? Because that may be what they're planning, to make blue communities desperate for money so they have to comply with Tallahassee, and to give good red communities all of the resources. That might be the plan. That's what the current president's doing with red and blue states. Or is it just this notion of we don't care about the math? Or are they going to ultimately propose pushing the tax burden on other communities? Let's see. I have not come out and formally opposed what they're proposing because we haven't seen a final proposal. And I've cautioned my Democratic friends, let's see what they finally propose. If the math works and it makes sense, then maybe we consider working with them on it. What I do know is we need targeted property tax relief right now. And as a candidate, what I propose and what I would like to see Democrats talk more about is where can we provide responsible tax relief? Two areas that I think we should explore. I think we desperately need first-time homebuyer tax relief. We currently have Save Our Homes for the long-time homebuyer or a homeowner. 25 years after artificially manipulating taxable values in favor of long-time homeowners, which we should keep Save Our Homes and portability, we've created an imbalance for the first-time homebuyer. That first-time homebuyer who buys a home from a 25-year homesteader, their tax bill jumps by 300, 400, 500%. That tax bill goes from $2,500 to $12,000. Now, between an insurance market that's collapsing and a property insurance or property tax market that is disproportionately tilted to long-time home buyers, owners, we need first-time home buyer tax relief. Is it a 3, 4, 5 year step up in basis? Is it a scaled homestead exemption that starts to balance it? We need it. The other area, if we're just looking at doing homestead exemption relief, if we can make the math work, and I think we probably can, I think we could work with League of Cities and NACO on and counties on this. Maybe we should consider an additional $100,000 homestead exemption right now. Understand what it would do. It would be the most progressive property tax relief package this state has ever seen. Because if you own a $200,000 home right now, on top of your current homestead exemptions, we virtually eliminate property taxes for you. If you have the $2 million home, sure, it's a little bit of a help, but you're still bearing the burden that you otherwise have been bearing. But it does begin to look at property tax relief for homeowners. I think we should look at targeted tax relief, even while we let Republicans figure out their final plan. If the Republicans present something that makes sense, we should work with them on it. If not, we need to make sure voters understand the fail points of the Republican proposal.
We have 5 minutes for one more
All right,
question.
just one more question, and that is, you mentioned very quickly about independent voters, and how crucial do you think in your campaign the independent voter will be towards your winning this election? Because I see Democrats not moving to the right, I see Republicans not moving to the left, but the independent voters are the ones who are, I don't know what the percentage is in Florida of independent voters.
It's about a third, a third, a third.
Okay.
Yeah.
That third is probably going to move towards the left, at least center left, at least to say we don't want any more of what we're seeing in the federal government on the right.
Right, right.
So how do you hope to be able to capture that vote?
Yeah, so I spent about 5 years organizing the independent vote nationally with Christy Todd Whitman, the former New Jersey governor, on the right, and Andrew Yang on the left, and I was kind of the centrist, independent. And it's a community I understand very well. It was one of the most informative parts of my political journey, was being an independent, untethered from major party dogma. And what I discovered are a couple of things. Independent voters is not a monolithic group. Ideologically, it's all over the place. Some are very far left, some are very far right. I found myself an independent because I'm more of a pluralist, right? I think we need a state catastrophic fund for insurance. I think we need to return to the direct delivery of health care right now in the state of Florida, regardless of the ability to pay. Those are pretty far left. I still think we should look to the private sector first for solutions. Maybe that's right of center. I still think defending everybody's rights and dignity is a used to be on the right. I don't know if it's on the left or if we're in a circle at this point, right? But I say that because the independent community, what tethers it all together is it is a very impatient, reform-minded community that wants change. And it's always pushing towards progress. That community generally is always pushing towards progress. There's a lot of analogy and comparison to the young voters in that group as well. It's an impatient, sometimes cynical, suspicious voting group that is super impactful when it mobilizes. And so, yes, I'm a proud Florida Democrat building a coalition that's rooted in democratic values, that the economy should work, government can improve our lives, and everybody's rights should be protected. But those values represent the heartbeat of the independent community as well. And from what we are seeing at town halls, a number of Republicans who are willing to come out and be a part of this as well, I'm hopeful we'll get north of 15% of Republicans in this race. You asked a question about Kentucky. Governor's races are litigated differently than federal races. Governor's races often get litigated like mayor's races. Are we educating your kids? Can you access health care? Do you have upward mobility, home ownership? Is the state investing in clean air and clean water? And do my kids want to stay here and my friends want to visit? That's it. I don't really litigate the president in this race outside of moments where it's a test of my leadership as much as his. The Obama meme, I stood up and condemned it. Some of the immigration rhetoric and policies he uses, I stand up and I condemn it. But I'm not asking people to litigate the president in a governor's race. We have a Senate race and congressional races that do that. If we're focused on the future of Florida, turning this state around, making it more welcoming and uplifting for everybody, it's how you get an Andy Beshear in Kentucky. It's how you get a Steve Bullock in Montana. It's how you get a David Jolly in Florida.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
You bet. Good to be with you.